Can I ask you a question? As a young person, did you have a favorite story? Like maybe a book, and maybe it was the one you always asked your mom or your dad to read to you before bedtime, or maybe you just read it again and again and again. So if it had pictures, you could actually close your eyes and still see the pictures in that favorite book all these years later. Maybe every time you read it, as you turn the page, it still had the power to make you feel nervous, even though you knew exactly what was about to happen. Anybody got a favorite storybook that you remember from your youth, and you just remember being excited, picking it up and reading it and reading it? I have one more question. Why do we all love stories so much? In every single culture, in every generation, in every human soul, we just love stories since forever. It's woven into the human soul. From tales around the campfire to anecdotes over coffee, from the strange stories in our dreams, all the way through to our favorite Netflix miniseries. We, the human race, we're hooked on storytelling. It's true, isn't it? We watched recently some of the David and Victoria Beckham documentary the other day, and I thought, again, it's amazing how our hearts rise and fall to the rhythm of a true life story. Amazing. I grew up as a child in Africa, in a remote village called Mwinilunga in the northwest province of Zambia. There was electricity for just 1 hour a day. And I remember us sitting under the stars around a campfire, listening to the best storytellers in the village. Absolutely electric. The question is, why are we wired to love stories? I think the reason is this. You and I love a story so much because we are a story. We are living a story. You are a pulsating, original, dramatic, beautiful story being told every new day. Your story has had chapters, hasn't it? Some filled with adventure, maybe some cliffhangers, certainly some heartache, definitely some excitement, probably some love, I'm sure many tears, but I hope lots of laughter. Your story brought you to this moment, on this day, in this place. And those rhythms of hope and fear and love and loss and joy and suspense that we understand so well when we watch a movie, they are the rhythms of your heart and mine, because you are a story. You are a story. Every story you listen to, it's an echo of the one you're living in. Young Henry, what a boy he is. He's a magnificent story in motion. His is already a tale touched by love and hope. I felt it this morning. So here's one more question. If you're a story, who's the author? If you're a story, who's the author? Well, this week I made a discovery. Those who are in the church regularly will know that every Sunday this autumn time in our Life Point meetings, we're pausing to look at one of the great names and titles given to Jesus in the Bible. This book is an arc of searchlights, every one pointing to Jesus. All the 1,100 chapters in the 66 books that make up this Bible, they are all in some way a spotlight to Jesus. Mick does a thing where he literally does this. He says, open your Bible, pick a book, and I'll tell you what it's saying about Jesus. Old Testament to New Testament. I love it when you do that, Mick. Because every chapter of this book is a spotlight pointing to Jesus. Some are prophecies before he was born. Call that the Old Testament. Some are eyewitness observations made as he lived. We call those the Gospels. Some are reflections and memories from the years after he left the earth. We call that the rest of the New Testament. And some of those spotlights in here on Jesus are actual titles, actual names given to Jesus in the Bible to help us understand him. There are at least 50 titles in here that are used to describe Jesus. So each Sunday at the moment, we're picking up one of those titles to see what we can learn. Some of you remember Colette, she taught us about Jesus the Lion. Simon taught us about Jesus the Lamb. Ollie taught us about Jesus the Lord. And there are more to come in the following weeks. But here is today's title. This is what I discovered this week. Not once, but twice. Jesus is described as the author. He's the divine story maker. He's the one who started the story of you and the one who will finish it gloriously as well. One passage describes Jesus as the author of our salvation, the one who writes the story of your beautiful life. What this means, my friends, is that he has made beautiful plans for your future. He is the creator of your destiny. He is the designer of your soul. If you are Harry Potter, he is J.K. Rowling. Strange phrase, I know. Should we get a bit more cultural? If you are Hamlet, he is William Shakespeare. If you are Snow White, he is Walt Disney. In the actual words of the Bible, it says it like this. Listen very carefully. This is a stunning description of his great story on earth, but how his story becomes yours. Hebrews 2, 9 to 11. But we see Jesus, who was himself made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor, because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. And in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, that's you and I, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of our salvation perfect through what he suffered. God the Father has made Jesus the author of our salvation, the writer of our stories. Jesus is the writer of your story. And very humbly for a couple of minutes, can I just tell you 3 things about Jesus, the author? About Jesus, the maker of your story. Number 1, this goes without saying, but I think we should say it because we live in a crazy generation. The author is bigger than the book. The author is bigger than the book. It's worth just saying this, because sometimes people say daft stuff like, why isn't God here for us to touch? In fact, famously, the first cosmonaut to travel into space, Yuri Gagarin, atheistic communist from Soviet Russia in 1961, he said this afterwards. He said, I went into space and I didn't find God. That doesn't make any sense at all. That's like Hamlet wondering why he hasn't bumped into Shakespeare. Doesn't make any sense. One is the character in a story. The other is the author of the story. And the author's bigger than the book. Harry Potter's not going to turn up for his new term at Hogwarts and find himself sitting next to J.K. Rowling. Doesn't make any sense. That would be weird, because the author is always bigger than the book. God is of a different nature to us, completely. That's exactly, literally, what the word holy means. It means of a different kind. When the Bible says God is holy, it doesn't mean stern and miserable. It means he's completely different to us. He's the author. We're the book. The author is bigger than the book. That's why we worship him. Because he made us and gave us life and breathed into our lungs and made us a living story. He's bigger than us. So we worship him. Second thing just to say about Jesus the author. The author has planned your story well. Jesus the author has prepared some stunning chapters for you to walk through. There are scenes in the life ahead of you, my friend, that will make all the people who love you punch the air in celebration. Can I just say that again? There are scenes ahead of you. There are chapters in your book ahead of you that will make those who love you punch the air in celebration when they see what's going to take place in your beautiful, courageous life. Because the author has written your story well. There are pages in your story that will move you, excite you, inspire you, and stretch you. Yes, there'll be some tears because this is life. A story would be boring if there were no trials, only triumphs. Be honest. Would you read that book? No. Because the rhythm of trial and triumph, of tears and joy, that's what makes life so utterly compelling. So there'll be some tears, but the outcome of every tear and every trial will be you growing noble and wise and strong and kind and bold and beautiful. The outcome of every trial will be a finer you and a finer me. A nobler you and a nobler me. Every trial will make us more like the person we were born to be upon the earth. There are pulsating chapters ahead of you, my friend, because the author has written a very good story for you to walk through. You will make dreams come true. You will experience adventures. You will make a difference to people around you. You will leave this world a better place. You will leave eternal footprints behind you upon the earth. That's your story, my friends. That's why you're living and breathing on the planet. That's what the author has planned for you. This is how the Bible describes your story. This is the author speaking from the book of Jeremiah. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. That is the executive summary of the book of you. The executive summary of the book of you. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you Michael, my friend, God has plans to give you a hope and a future because he's written a good story for every one of us. If your story was made into an audio book on the Audible app, I think that would be the strapline. From humble beginnings, he or she rose to a life of hope. That's where you're heading, to a life of hope and a great future. Can I be really bold for a minute? I kind of feel that God, the author of your story, has put down his pen for a moment and paused from writing just a minute so he can speak to you this morning. As if he wants to look into each of your eyes and each of your hearts, and he just wants to say this: I have planned a good story, and in it you're a success, not a failure. You are loved, not lost. So hold your head high and live your story with courage. That's what the author of your book is saying today. Live your story with courage. So number one, the author bigger than the book. Number two, the author has planned your story well. And now I'm going to finish with this. Number three, this author that we're talking about today, the one whose name is Jesus. This author has done something awesome. This author, who is Christ, broke the rules of authoring. See, he loved his characters so much that he did want to know us. This author's heart ached so much for those he had created that he did the unthinkable. He wrote himself into the story so he could know you and love you and look after you and understand you and walk with you. Jesus came into our story because he wanted to know you. He wanted to know you. John in the Bible describes Jesus, the teller of the stories, the author of the books, in a kind of shorthand way. He compresses it all, and he just describes Jesus as the Word because he's the maker of all the words. So Jesus is described in the Bible as the Word. That means he's the maker of all the words, the writer of all the stories. Listen to what John says. Just listen to this. In the beginning was the Word. That's the eternal Son of God, the maker of all the words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, the author of it all. And John goes on like this. Then the Word became flesh and lived among us. Sam, that's a little bit amazing, isn't it? Wrote himself into our story. The author did. John goes on. The Word became flesh and lived among us. And we saw his glory. The glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And John went on. He also wrote a letter, which you find later in the Bible. And as he wrote that letter, you can still feel the breathless awe in his heart. This is what it says. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Hear the wonder in his voice now as he writes this letter. That which was from the beginning, we have seen with our eyes. We have touched with our hands the word of life. In other words, the author has come into our book, into our story, so that we can see him and hear him and know him. It really is like the Son of God laid down his pen for 33 years of human time, stepped into the same dust of planet Earth that you and I walk, breathed the same air, and became a character in his own story so he could find you and find me. He crossed from heaven and to earth to find you, my friend. And I just feel I was sitting this morning, just sitting with God, just thinking. And I felt God said, there's at least one person here. And you just feel like everybody walks past you. Nobody comes to find you. You just feel somehow, I don't know, but I just seem to be the unnoticed one. And I felt God wanted me to tell you today that he crossed from heaven to earth to find you. Because he saw you, and he knew you, and he loved you, and he stepped into your story. And all you have to do is invite him in, and he'll walk your journey with you, chapter by chapter, adventures and struggles, trials and triumphs. Jesus will walk it with you if you invite him in. Because you are not lost and you're not alone. God knows you and he loves you. The Creator became the created. That's so strange. He stepped into the world of the created. He was born. That's why once a year at Christmas we stop and marvel, because the Creator was born, the giver of life. I'm so glad these things were not left to me, because I think if I was the God of the ages stepping into the human race, I'd have found a big palace, but he found a stable. I'd have found a big throne, but he found a manger. I'd have found some royal robes, but he found strips of cloth. I'd have at least had some royal attendants, but he had humble shepherds. The Creator born into our story. The Bible doesn't just call Jesus the author of your faith. It calls him the author and the finisher, the completer. In other words, he'll be with you till the final breath, till the final chapter. He'll be making you more like him till the final breath, because he's the author and the completer of your story. You're going to make it, my friend. You're not just a starter, you're a finisher. There are fantastic chapters still ahead of you, and you are going to make it. All you have to do is put your hand into the hand of the author. Will you do that today, I wonder? Will you turn over a page in your life today? Will you walk with your Creator for the rest of your days? Will you let him get you to the final chapter? Will you say yes to his good plans for your life?